I am not a humanist. Lots of atheists identify as such, but I don't. In fact, I tend to actively reject that label, and I wanted to spend some time explaining why. And that's kind of what we do around here after all, so we might as well go ahead. We just look at claims and explore whether those claims are worthwhile to accept, and as far as I'm concerned, humanism isn't. So, let's dive right in. We're going to do some more kind of oddball stuff today because, well, you'll figure it out. I'm going to explain why in a second, but this is sort of a quasi political esque kind of thing. And again, if that offends you, the exit's right over there. Come back for the next video. I just don't think that this is very useful, and I wanted to take some time, seemingly quite a bit of time, explaining exactly why I think that. You might not agree, which is why the comments, as always, are open, and you can express yourselves there, but right now, let's just get into this. This is going to be a long, strange ride. So, this whole thing came about a bit oddly. Deconverted Man put up a quick video calling attention to another video which had properly defined atheism, which is really pretty amazing in and of itself, being a religious video. But that video also claimed that atheists are much more likely to be humanists than supposedly, I guess, Christians. Granted, he did say most, which is good, but I've personally never identified as a humanist. In fact, I'm pretty ardently not a humanist, even though I probably share at least some things in common with them. So I decided to just go out and wander around looking for a more or less definitive set of characteristics for what humanists supposedly are, and that was actually harder than I thought it would be. Eventually, I came up with this, and while I'm not sure that it's definitive, at least it's something to take a look at. So let's get into the 14 characteristics of humanism and see where I agree or disagree. First, it gives us a general definition, which of course is always helpful. It says that humanism is a philosophical tradition based around a belief in human agency, rational thought, naturalism, and altruistic morality. It's one of those things that, yeah, not really. That's vague enough where I'm not sure if I'm going to accept that or not, but I suppose it depends on how you're going to define and defend all of that, something that I'm sure we're going to get to down the line. But at the moment, let's just accept that as it stands and keep on going. First, we come to agency, which it defines as the prioritization of the collective and moral agency of humans based on the belief that humans can determine a correct moral path and work together to follow it. So here's where we're already going to have some issues because I don't think there is a correct moral path. At least not in the sense that there is one and only one way and everything else is demonstrably objectively wrong. There are lots of ways that we can achieve a useful goal, and none of those ways are perfect. I don't think there's a single path that is equally beneficial for absolutely everyone involved. Effectively, we have to define our goals, and let's be honest, not everybody is going to agree, and then we have to figure out what path to take that most people can go along with, since, as we all know, not everybody's going to agree on anything. Therefore, everything is just a trade-off. So I'm not really on board with this first one, but let's keep going. Next, we get to freedom. And it states it is the principle that humans are entitled to rights and freedoms. Yeah, sorry, don't agree with that one at all, because nobody is entitled to anything. we may decide collectively that some people are to receive some subset of freedoms or rights or whatever, and that's not universal, nor has it ever been, but that doesn't make those things magically apply to everyone. If you commit a crime, for instance, you go to jail. Well, there goes your freedom. If you commit a felony, then you lose the right to vote. There goes your rights. You can say that the criminal did something wrong and therefore they deserve having their rights and their freedoms taken away. Okay, fine, but what about children? Children have limited rights and they certainly are not free. What did they do wrong? What about when specific rights and specific freedoms come into conflict with those of other people? What do you do then? What if people can't agree on what rights they should have? Who wins? Because it's obvious that everyone can't. What set of rights do we go with, and why those rights and not some others? Why are you right and everyone else is wrong? There goes entitlement. This whole thing is entirely subjective, based often on completely arbitrary standards. More often than not, it's might makes right or majority rules, and a lot of people don't tend to like that. I defy you to find any system where this isn't the case. Let's not kid ourselves. Now we get to equality, and we all know that doesn't exist. The list states it as the principle that humans are equal. Well, equal in what way? Equal under the law? Maybe, but we also know that the law is just made up. And I'm perfectly fine with equality across the board without regard to race, gender, sexual orientation, or whatever. I think that's perfectly fine. But I don't think those things should ever even be a consideration. But that's not how most societies work either. It's really, really hard to reach a point where those things don't even get noticed. I mean, they kind of have to get noticed. You can't just poke your eyes out so that you're unaware of any of that stuff. But if we can reach the point where we just treat everyone the same without pretending that everyone is actually the same, because that's just a disaster waiting to happen, then I think we're doing pretty good. But why do I say it that way? Because if everyone is equal, then a 4-foot-tall, 90-year-old paraplegic ought to be able to play on the Olympic basketball team, right? Because, everybody's equal. But equal doesn't mean equivalent, and we have seen a lot of really, really stupid stuff going on, lots of it recently, where just because you identify as a thing, that doesn't actually make you that thing. Reality isn't at all concerned with what you want to be, only with what you actually are. Next, we move on to the value of life, which here it's defined as the view that life is valuable and that the human experience can be wonderful. And I don't agree with that at all, really. I mean, life is valuable to me, at least my life is. That doesn't mean that everyone else shares that view, nor necessarily that they should. Someone who's dying in agony with cancer, they may not think that their life is valuable at all. And I'm willing to bet that their human experience kinda sucks. This is really where I start to get into the whole "that's not me at all" thing, because I don't value life like that, full stop. It's on a case-by-case basis, and the decisions that are made are up to the individuals directly involved. I have absolutely no problem with suicide at all. You can be perfectly healthy and decide you just don't want to live anymore. And if that's the case, go ahead and die. I don't care. I am not going to get in your way because I am not here to say life has to exist if I can force you to live it. That's just stupid. Because here's something that's going to crop up a couple of times over the next couple of sections, I'm sure, but I don't think the life is special. I don't think that people are special. We're just animals with an overinflated opinion of ourselves. It's one thing to say that we shouldn't cause each other unnecessary harm based on the assumption that if you don't do bad things to others, they should reciprocate and not do bad things back to you. But since not everyone is going to agree on what constitutes a bad thing, we're right back to might makes right. The ones with the power decide how everyone else is going to behave. And that's reality, but I don't think it works very well for humanism. Now we're going to get to naturalism, and believe it or not, I'm even going to quibble here. It says humanists embrace naturalism, whereby they believe truth can be found in observing nature to determine natural laws and forces. Now, depending on how they're using natural laws, I might reject that out of hand. If you're going to pretend that there's a body of unchanging moral principles regarded as a basis for all human conduct, yeah, I'm going to call bullshit. It doesn't exist, and if you think it does, please feel free to present your evidence for that in the comments. Good luck on that because you're going to need it. As far as I'm concerned, naturalism works because it's all that we have any evidence for, and all I care about is the evidence. Got any? I didn't think so, and this is why the religious fail so often. Now, there are some things that we can take from the natural world, but morality, that isn't one of them. We can't learn how to be good to each other because we all have slightly different expectations and desires that have nothing at all to do with the natural world. They are subjective decisions that we have made individually, and it's really hard to come up with a moral system based on wildly varying ideas of what we all happen to like. And we're going to get to that in a second, I'm sure, so stay tuned. On to social, which is described as the view that humans are social beings that belong together as a collective, such as a society or community. Well, other than the fact that that's not necessarily true, because there are people who are antisocial and who don't really want to be around others, who gets to be part of these societies and communities? If you're born in a particular place, are you automatically inducted even if you don't want to be? Because this is kind of a problem if you think about it. Maybe I don't want to be part of your society. That happened back in the communist Russia era where lots of people tried to defect to the West. Well, what if you don't want the society into which you've been born? What if that society doesn't want you? What happens then? Now, I agree that we are, by our very nature, often social beings that require other people to be successful, but that doesn't mean that we all belong together in one giant collective. What if I think you're a dick? Do I have to hang out with you? Who gets to make those rules? This is really where the fact that we're not all magically special comes in. We're just animals. Maybe we're smart animals, although I think we all know that we can't even rely on that. But we are not what our egos would often like to think that we are. And that's where we get to a big one. Altruistic morality is complete bullshit. Altruism doesn't exist, at least not true altruism. It says that altruistic morality is the belief in a universal moral core of humanity and the view that humans are altruistic and moral. And that's crap. Like I keep saying, we're just animals whether you like it or not. We tend to be very self-serving, and if we get too far out of line, we need to be reined in by those around us who might disagree with our actions. There goes freedom again, doesn't it? This is little more than, wouldn't it be nice? Yeah, maybe, but that's not the reality that we happen to live in. People generally follow the rules because they don't want to face the penalties if they don't. I don't remember where I saw this, so take it with a grain of salt, but something like 70% of men and 50% of women have considered at some point in their lives that they should murder somebody else. Now, most don't, of course, because they don't want to face the consequences, but it's not like we're all squeaky clean angels who never have an antisocial thought run through our tiny little heads. In fact, I don't think that there's such a thing as true altruism. We always have ulterior motives, even if it's the thought that we'll be remembered if we throw ourselves on the live grenade. We get something out of it. Some of it is programmed by evolution and some of it is programmed by society, but there's never a zero-sum game. And here's the big one that you always hear humanists talking about. Human flourishing is all. It says the goal of life under humanism is for human societies to flourish to produce self-fulfillment. It goes on to say that humanists reject the idea that the goal of life is to prepare for an afterlife. Well, I'll agree with the second part, but not necessarily the first. We already talked about freedoms and human agency. How can you possibly insist that humanists must have a goal of human flourishing? It seems to be rather self-contradictory. Also, not everybody's going to agree on what human flourishing means. What about somebody who thinks that one particular race should flourish on the backs of slaves kept of another race? Or that men should flourish if women are kept in the home and treated as property? There is no singular definition here, and that seems to be what a lot of humanists I see seem to think would happen. Now, some of this is going to come up in a minute, I'm sure, but I'll remind you when we get there. I think the real problem with all of these quasi-religious ideologies, and I absolutely do consider humanism to be a quasi-religious view, is that it assumes that everyone is going to fall into lockstep and just toe the party line, and that's absolutely not likely to happen. Rational thought. Now, I am entirely on board with rational thought. I think people should be rational, critical, and concerned with whether their ideas comport accurately with objective reality, and they should only accept things based on the evidence that it is likely correct. That would be great. We also know that that is a horribly unrealistic view and won't ever happen in the real world. Just because you really like the idea, that doesn't mean that it's realistic. Therefore, I'm not going to disagree with the concept of rational thought, only the idea that most people are ever going to be capable of it. Most people will always be sheep. They will get dragged around by the nose by the wolves, too stupid and too irrational to ever stand up for themselves or have the capacity for independent thought. That's just the reality that we live in. If humanism really stands or falls on the ability of people to be rational, then humanism is in for some serious trouble. Tradition and culture. Humanism embraces all things human with a deep respect for human traditions and cultures. Why? I mean, this is a serious question. I find that kind of broad-brushed respect to be not only pointless, but often absolutely harmful. Should we respect religion? Because that's a human tradition. Should we respect Nazism? Because that was certainly part of a human culture. Or is this just saying one thing and doing something completely different? Saying you respect everyone and everything and then picking and choosing which things you are actually going to respect? Yeah, I don't buy that. I mean, it's fine, you really have to do that to some degree, but at least be honest with what you're doing up front. I am never going to respect religion. I will respect the religious, the human beings behind them, but I'm never going to respect their beliefs. The people might deserve it, maybe, but the institutions certainly do not. Respect the respectable and nothing more. There are lots of traditions and cultures and other things that do not deserve anyone's respect, period. And my list probably differs from yours. This, again, is where I walk away from humanism because humanism treats humans like we're inherently special. And we're not. We just have a vested interest in our own success, and while that part of it is fine, so long as we don't just become mindless cheerleaders of mankind, that tends to be the kind of thing that humanism is doing. We're just not that hot, and if we can't acknowledge that, how can we ever hope to fix any of our problems? Now, for the next couple, I don't know if they were intended to go into the list of 14 because no matter how you cut this up, we don't get to 14 characteristics, so I just don't get it. Therefore, I'm just going to go for it because why the hell not? So they list secular humanism, which I don't think could possibly be a characteristic of secular humanism. But as I said, we'll just go take a look. It says it's a comprehensive worldview that embraces human reason, naturalism, altruistic morality, and distributive justice. I already addressed most of that, so it doesn't seem worthwhile to do it again. It really seems that this is only here as a comparison to what comes after, so let's go get to that. Religious humanism. This one strikes me as completely nonsensical when it says that it is characterized by the absence of espoused belief in a God. Then it's not religious, is it? Because religion, by any definition in any dictionary you can find, requires the belief in a god or gods. It goes on to say that it serves the human need for ritual and community. Well, I can go for community, but ritual? We are a social species, but we don't need ritual. Some people might want it, but that's not a need, it's a desire. A need is something that, without it, you're going to keel over. And nobody ever dropped dead without ritual. I do just fine without ritual, especially without religious ritual. And I think most people just need to grow the hell up. Now we get to the big problem. And as I was writing this, I was watching a video where the theist calling in was talking about how progressive religions can be important in the world. And the host went off on how they do anything progressive that they can. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think that most progressives and most progressivism in the modern world is just stupid. So here it defines progressivism as promotion of aggressive change, progress, science, and technology. Yeah, but according to who? Now, the science and the technology part is fine, within reason. Aggressive change is, troubling. But the idea of progress sets up a lot of warning bells. Progress according to who? Because what I see a lot of so-called progressives saying today, I don't think it qualifies. In fact, I call most of these people regressives because they're not trying to go forward, they're trying to go backward. They're trying to push racial tension, mostly for political power. They're trying to push ideological tension, again, so they can get into office. They don't propose things that demonstrably improve people's lives. Quite the opposite, in fact. They just want everyone to be just like they are, just like you see with the religious. If everyone is just like you don't have to worry about thinking critically, and most of these people don't. They mindlessly attack whatever has been identified as the enemy, and then, when there seem to be no more enemies on the radar, well, they turn on their own side. It becomes all about ideological purity, and nobody ever really qualifies. So, fuck progressivism, at least as it exists in the modern world. It's another one of those things that conceptually, sure, it sounds good on paper, but as it's actually practiced, hell no. Finally, we get down to ideology and religion. Now, I have no idea how this is intended because, as I said, this would be point 15 on their 14 characteristic list, so this is all pretty messed up. I think this explains exactly why I can't be a humanist, so I'm just going to read it. Modern humanism isn't a succinct philosophy, but it is rather an expansive ideology and religion as represented by secular and religious humanism. These take a strong position on a number of social and philosophical issues such that they offer a complete worldview. No, they offer a complete mess. I would say that this is all a hell of a lot closer to a religion than it is to an ideology. There are points of faith that must be practiced without question, namely the aforementioned progressive bullshit. It's not focusing on making humanity better, at least not in any demonstrable way. There is no suggested path forward that we can examine critically and put to a rational test. Instead, just like religion, it's a bunch of feel-good platitudes that might sound good initially, but they just don't stand up to any kind of rigorous evaluation. They don't address how people actually are, only how they desperately wish they could be, just like religion does. There is no workable solution provided. It's just a bunch of feel-good nonsense designed to appeal to dumb people emotionally so that they sign on the dotted line and become part of the humanist cult. No thanks. That is definitely not for me. I only care about things that provide real change in the real world, and this kind of hippy-dippy humanistic bullcrap, it simply doesn't. We need to do a whole lot better than this. We need to have a much more realistic view of the world that we live in, and this absolutely doesn't qualify. So, I think I've gone on for long enough on this, but what do you think? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the comments and let me know. This kind of stuff just doesn't impress me. It really starts to look like a replacement religion for people who have walked away from traditional faiths but didn't learn any rational lessons. We need to reject cult-like thinking and stop joining up because they're promising milk and cookies. The only way to improve is to understand what's actually going on, and none of these ideological and quasi-religious cults seem to have a clue. If it's trying to appeal only to your emotions, run. They're dangerous, and I think we've had just about enough of that. Let's try for some intellect for a change. It's the only way to demonstrably improve, and that's what we all really need right now. We need to get better than the childishness of the past. Enough is enough.